Titus Andronicus for iHearShakespeare. Often condemned by critics, Titus Andronicus may well be Shakespeare's bloodiest and most gruesome tragedy. Yet for all its killings, dismembering, and general bloodletting, it was a terrific success when first produced somewhere between 1592 and 1594. Shakespeare would have had reason to believe that his Titus Andronicus would be successful, for he had borrowed ideas from contemporary horror and revenge plays that were immensely popular of the time. Take, for example, Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy, written sometime between 1582 and 1592, which was wildly popular with Elizabethan audiences. The lead character, Hieronymo, is initially hailed a hero, then loses a son to murder, goes mad, and stages a play to trap his enemies. This sequence of events is not unlike what Titus, in Titus Andronicus, endures. Shakespeare also borrows character traits from Barabbas in Christopher Marlowe's The Jew of Malta to create the Moor Aaron. Both Barabbas and Aaron are wicked, Machiavellian characters who, respectively, point to their otherness as one is Jewish and the other black, as causes, or at least catalysts, for their actions. But perhaps the most important function that Titus Andronicus fulfills is that it points the way and provides an early testing ground for the skills that Shakespeare will use to create his later masterpieces, including Hamlet and King Lear. And now, let's begin Act 1, Scene 1 of Titus Andronicus for iHearShakespeare. Act 1. Returning victorious from the Gothic Wars, Titus Andronicus is welcomed home to Rome as a hero. Included among the treasures, possessions, and captives that he brings back are the queen, Tamora, and 3 of her sons, Alarbus, Demetrius, and Chiron. The Moor, Aaron, who attends to Tamora's every need, is also brought back as a prize. Meanwhile, 2 Roman brothers, Saturninus and Bassianus, are making known their claim to the title of emperor, while the general populace seems to view Titus as the worthiest candidate. Being the elder brother, Saturninus holds a stronger claim to the title, but his general disposition is hardly suited to be a ruler. Bassianus, the younger, is certainly more stable and would make a better emperor, but holds a weaker claim. Before any decision is made as to who will become emperor, Titus has Tamora's eldest son, Alarbus, taken away, quartered, and burned on a sacrificial pyre as an offering to those who died in battle. The ignored pleas by Tamora for the life of her firstborn son will form the basis for her revenge, which will hold dire consequences for the proud Titus. Indeed, we immediately begin to suspect that Titus's children will be targeted when, with a well-constructed entrance, Titus's daughter, Lavinia, appears and obsequiously asks for the blessing of her father. His first words to her, "Live, outlive thy father's days," further the audience's already dismal views of Lavinia's fate. Meanwhile, Marcus, Titus's brother, suggests to the gathered crowd that Titus become emperor. The hot-headed Saturninus panics and calls the Roman patricians to draw swords in his defense. Titus quells the bubbling feud by declining the title, promising to win popular favor to Saturninus and announcing his support to Saturninus. Contented for the moment by Titus's words, Saturninus offers to promote the name of Andronicus by claiming Lavinia for his bride and empress. A chance for peace is quickly lost when Saturninus turns his fickle gaze away from Lavinia and toward the more mature Tamora. At this point, the stage directions indicate that Saturninus courts Tamora in a dumb show. Directors will handle this moment differently, but the outcome will be the same. Saturninus will be depicted as having abandoned Lavinia and desirous of Tamora. Bassianus is well aware of what Saturninus is doing and takes this moment to seize Lavinia, whom he has loved all along, and absconds with her. Ignorant of what has happened, Titus calls for the emperor's guards to save Lavinia from Bassianus, only to be challenged by his own sons. Being intolerant of anything or anyone that goes against the state, Titus slays his youngest son, Mucius, for impeding the efforts to retrieve Lavinia from Bassianus, a most dishonorable act. Resolved that he shall choose Tamora, Saturninus tells Titus that he cares neither for Lavinia nor any person that holds the name Andronicus. With the crowd still gathered, Saturninus makes Tamora queen and empress of Rome. Upon their exit, Marcus and Titus's sons re-enter and beg Titus to at least give Mucius an honorable burial. After considerable pleading, Titus grudgingly agrees to let Mutius be buried within the family tomb. Next, the newly enjoined couples, Saturninus and Timora, Bassianus and Lavinia, re-enter the scene. Bassianus implores Saturninus to take Titus back into his favor because he killed his youngest son for the sake of Saturninus. Before Saturninus can respond, Titus accuses Bassianus of committing the greater dishonorable deed, impeding the wishes of the Emperor of Rome, Saturninus. The only person who manages to quell the squabbling Romans is the newly promoted Empress, Timora. This day, declares Timora, all quarrels die. And following those words, Marcus, Lavinia, and Titus's sons kneel in a gesture to ask pardon of His Majesty, Saturninus. I will not be denied, says Timora to Saturninus, who, reluctantly perhaps, looks back at the submissive group, pardons them all, and changes the tone of the scene by abruptly stating that this day shall be a love day. But before they all depart, Titus recommends a hunting trip with Saturninus on the next day to hunt the panther and the hart. Here concludes Act 1 of Titus Andronicus, or I Hear Shakespeare. Act 2, Scene 1. Like a raven perched inconspicuously in the background, the Moor, Aaron, has been keeping watch over the unfolding events generally and Timora specifically. Alone at the top of Act 2, Aaron reviews Timora's rise to power in Rome and makes known how he lusts for her, calling her a goddess, Semiramis, nymph, and siren. Chiron and Demetrius enter, interrupt Aaron's meditation, and argue over their passions for Lavinia to the point of drawing swords against each other. Aaron offers a solution to satisfy their desires for Lavinia by suggesting that, while the party is hunting in the forest, the two men single out Lavinia in a hidden plot and revel in her treasury, in other words, rape her. Scene 2 finds the hunting party prepared and the chase about to begin. We also learn that Saturninus and Timora, as well as Bassianus and Lavinia, are married. Scene 3. Again, we find Aaron alone, bitterly declaiming his plots for the audience's sake. He has hidden a bag of gold under a tree that he will use later in the play to implicate the sons of Titus. Incidentally, this bag of gold is referred to as treasure. Likewise, the sexual intercourse that Chiron and Demetrius will enjoy with Lavinia is also referred to as treasure. Timora enters the scene and suggests that she and Aaron enjoy the privacy of the forest with a quickie. Aaron is too consumed by thoughts of vengeance for lovemaking and admits to Timora that this day Bassianus must die, and his love, referring to Lavinia, must lose her tongue. He also gives her a letter insisting that she give it to Saturninus. The letter, incidentally, will be delivered to Saturninus by Titus rather than Timora. The news within it will condemn two of Titus's sons. But Timora is a little too eager to have her way with Aaron, and, having ignored his entreaty for her to stop her lust for the moment, the two are consequently caught by Bassianus and Lavinia. Feeling he has nothing to lose, Bassianus threatens to expose Timora's infidelity to her new husband Saturninus, when the foursome is interrupted by Chiron and Demetrius. In an effort to rally Chiron and Demetrius to attack Bassianus, Timora immediately launches into false claims that Bassianus and Lavinia have been threatening her with torture and death. Uninterested in hearing Bassianus's retort, the two sons stab him. Timora stands ready to slay Lavinia when Chiron and Demetrius stop her and persuade their mother to let Lavinia live so that they may have their way with her, to enjoy her treasure. Lavinia begs Timora for a quick death rather than allow Chiron and Demetrius to rape her. Pitiless, Timora encourages her sons to enjoy the girl, but with the caveat that they make sure she is left unable to name the perpetrators. The scene concludes with Bassianus's body being thrown into the nearby pit. Timora seeking out Aaron, she just can't stop herself, and Demetrius and Chiron making away with Lavinia. The action shifts to Aaron, who is guiding Quintus and Marcius, both sons of Titus, to a pit where he says a panther has been trapped. Aaron conveniently allows Marcius to fall into the pit where he is injured. Marcius sees Bassianus's dead body in the pit, asks for help from Quintus, who offers his hand, but their efforts result in Quintus falling into the pit as well. Also worth mentioning here is that the pit that the three men have fallen into can be argued to be analogous to female sexual anatomy, as it is described with phrases like, "this abhorred pit, subtle hole whose mouth is covered with rude growing briars, unhallowed and blood-stained hole, a detested dark, blood-drinking pit," and so on. These terms may be considered misogynistic, but the analogy may be argued. So there are three men in the pit: Quintus, Marcius, sons of Titus, and Bassianus, who is dead. While they've been extolling their awful predicament, Aaron has located Saturninus and is bringing him to the pit where he will accuse the Andronicus brothers of murdering Bassianus. Tamora and Titus are quick to join the group. The letter that Aaron earlier gave Tamora is now delivered to Saturninus, which communicates a plot between Quintus and Marcius to kill Bassianus. Titus kneels before Saturninus, begging for mercy to be shown to his sons, but the emperor will show none. Convinced of their guilt by the letter, Saturninus orders his attendants to bring all three men out of the pit, one to be buried, two to be sentenced and executed. Scene 4. Meanwhile, a horror of a different kind has been happening. The audience learns what has happened with Lavinia when she appears with Chiron and Demetrius. Demetrius and Chiron are quite happy, quite satisfied. Lavinia looks stunned and destroyed. As promised, she has indeed been raped. But to make sure she cannot communicate the guilty parties to anyone, Chiron and Demetrius have cut out her tongue and chopped off her hands. The brothers desert Lavinia in the forest. She is eventually found by Titus's brother Marcus. When he begs her to speak, she can only open her mouth and let forth a crimson river of warm blood. Here concludes Act 2 of Titus Andronicus for iHearShakespeare. Act 3. Once proud and hailed a hero, Titus begins Act 3 still begging for the lives of his two sons, Marcius and Quintus, who have been framed for the death of Bassianus. The last half of his pleas literally goes unheard because the judges, senators, and tribunes have taken the two condemned men away. Titus's youngest son, Lucius, manages to get Titus off the ground and states that he wants to try to rescue his brothers. Before he can leave, Marcus enters with Lavinia. The audience must now experience the discovery of Lavinia's horror through the eyes of her father and brother. Titus's reaction to his daughter in this moment is disturbing because he's not sure if he should laugh or cry, and so we, as the audience, are not sure which to do either. In what would appear to make matters better, Aaron appears and announces that the emperor has agreed to release Marcius and Quintus if Marcus, Lucius, or Titus will chop off a hand and send it back to the emperor. Overcome with joy by the news, the three men argue over who will chop off a hand. They are all more than willing to do it. Bizarrely, they don't give a moment's consideration to the possibility that the emperor might not hold up his end of the bargain. And while Lucius and Marcus are off to find an axe, Titus holds out his hand and Aaron chops it off. Titus quite contentedly tells Lucius and Marcus that they need not use the axe, for the deed is done, and Aaron is on his way to the emperor. The three men return their attention to lamenting Lavinia's condition. Shortly thereafter, a messenger comes to them delivering the heads of Titus's sons and the hand that Titus allowed Aaron to chop off. There never was such a bargain. Marcus and Lucius make curses, Lavinia kisses poor Titus, and now utterly devastated, Titus says, "When will this fearful slumber have an end?" Frustrated by Titus's immobility, Marcus exclaims, "Now is a time to storm, why art thou still?" Titus, who may be slipping into madness, can only laugh. "I have not another tear to shed," he finally replies, and then designs an exit that is both horrifying and comical. Titus holds one head in his left hand. He asks Marcus to carry the other head, and as for Lavinia, he has her carry his hand between her teeth. Lucius must, according to Titus, go into exile. And indeed, Lucius leaves the country, but with a purpose: to raise an army with the Goths to be revenged on Rome and Saturnine. Scene 2 transitions the action to Titus's house, where they have set out food that is just enough to give strength as will revenge these bitter woes. Titus laments at length Lavinia's condition, which seems to only exacerbate her weary mood. Titus's bizarre behavior is highlighted when, after Marcus kills a fly with a knife, Titus bemoans the innocence of the fly who had only come to make us merry. Marcus attempts to soften Titus's compassion for the fly by likening it to the Empress's Moor, Erin, by describing it as a black, ill-favored fly. Marcus's analogy is a little too effective, for Titus begins hacking at the dead insect, as if it were Erin and Tamora. Before Titus retires with Lavinia and his grandson to read sad stories, Marcus says of Titus, "Alas, poor man, grief has so wrought on him. He takes false shadows for true substances." Here concludes Act 3 of Titus Andronicus for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 4 opens with Titus's grandson running terrified from Lavinia. Although she appears frightful, she only wants the boy, Marcus, and Titus to follow her to some books she has in mind. Lavinia manages to get them to look at Ovid's Metamorphoses so that they come across the tale of Philomel who, like herself, was raped in a forest. Titus and Marcus follow her meaning. She next takes a staff and, with one end of it in her mouth, she uses her stumps to guide the staff to write stuprum, meaning rape, and Chiron, Demetrius. Finally inspired to action, Titus devises a plan to be revenged upon the guilty perpetrators, which begins with his grandson delivering a cryptic message on a scroll along with handsome weapons to Chiron and Demetrius, so that whenever they have need they may be armed and appointed well. Scene 2 depicts Titus's grandson completing his task as errand boy, and Aaron, who is present as the gifts and message are delivered, understands the slyness of Titus's gifts. That is, that Titus knows who raped Lavinia. While Chiron and Demetrius recall how they enjoyed raping Lavinia and wishing they could repeat the act, a nurse enters with a newborn baby that clearly belongs to Aaron. The nurse is appalled by the baby, calling it loathsome as a toad. She explains that she was sent by Tamora to find Aaron so that he may kill the baby. When Aaron balks at the request, Chiron and Demetrius offer to dispatch the baby. In the only act that elicits compassion for his character, Aaron passionately defends the child. The cunning Moor manages to get everyone to sit down to discuss the situation calmly. After determining that the only other person besides Chiron and Demetrius who has seen the baby is the nurse, he kills her. Aaron next tells the two brothers that they must do away with the body while he makes plans to return to the Goths, where he will raise the baby to be a warrior and command a camp. Scene 3 shows Marcus, Titus's grandson, and other men gathering with bow and arrows, equipped with letters attached at their points. We don't know what the letters say exactly, but we do know that they are intended for various Roman gods. The extent to which the notes ask for help from the gods, or that they accuse the gods, matters not. What does matter is that this action does not depict a man in his right mind. Does he expect the gods to listen? Does he expect to injure the gods with the arrows? How long will Marcus humor his brother in this condition? Marcus finally finds a more effective use for the arrows. He has the men shoot them into the emperor's court to afflict his pride. In what is likely meant to be a moment of comedy, a clown appears with a basket and 2 pigeons in it, who Titus mistakes for a messenger from the gods. During his conversation with the clown, it should be noted, Titus shifts between prose and irregular verse. Scholars will identify this, as well as the fact that he shifts between using you and thou, as evidence that Titus's mind is slipping or has slipped altogether. Regardless, Titus continues to ask the clown if there is news from the gods. Unable to get a satisfactory answer from the clown, Titus asks him to deliver a supplication to the emperor. The clown agrees and the men exit. Scene 4 shows Saturninus outraged because someone has shot arrows into his court. Again, it is Tamora who acts the more maturely and calms Saturninus down. Next, the clown enters, delivers the message from Titus, and Saturninus' fury is rekindled. This time, he is stopped by a messenger who enters and warns Saturninus of an invasion by the Goths, led by Titus' son, Lucius. The emperor whimpers and whines about how the common people love Lucius and not him, until Tamora stops him, stating, "King, be thy thoughts imperious like thy name." Tamora coddles him long enough to make him agree to her plan. She will charm Titus so that he'll do whatever she says and so save Saturninus' kingship. Here concludes Act 4 of Titus Andronicus for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 5 begins with the return of Lucius, who has won the favor of the Goths and rallied them to fight against Saturninus and Tamora. While rallying his newfound troops, Aaron and his baby are brought on as hostages. Lucius threatens to hang both Aaron and the baby. Aaron promises to confess all if Lucius will promise to save the baby. Lucius agrees, and Aaron begins to retell the events to the horror of all. Aaron makes it known that the baby is the child of himself and Tamora, that Chiron and Demetrius not only killed Bassianus, but that they also raped Lavinia, cut out her tongue, and chopped off her hands. That he wrote the letter that Titus found that implicated Mucius and Quintus, that he hid the bag of gold to implicate further the sons, and that he came up with the idea that got Titus to cut off his hand in hopes of saving those same 2 sons. When Lucius asks Aaron if he's sorry for these heinous deeds, Aaron replies spitefully, "Nothing grieves me heartily indeed, but that I cannot do 10,000 more." Comprehending just how extremely malicious Aaron is, Lucius decides that Aaron should not die so sweet a death as hanging, but that they should come up with a more just execution. As Aaron is being freed from the noose, a messenger enters with word from the emperor stating that Lucius should meet with the emperor at Titus's house. Lucius agrees. Scene 2 shows Tamora disguised in such a fashion that is meant to suggest the personification of revenge. She explains to her sons who accompany her, and for the benefit of the audience of course, that she comes to Titus's house to trick him into thinking that she has come to help him right his heinous wrongs. Tamora calls up to Titus. Everyone thinks Titus has gone insane, yet when he answers Tamora, he seems to know exactly who she is. He identifies her as Tamora and declares that he is not mad. Tamora maintains her suspicions that Titus is insane, or at least that he is still able to be manipulated. Tamora insists that she is revenge, and that she has come to discuss how she might help Titus be revenged. Titus suggests that she kill the 2 men that flank her, for they are, according to Titus, the embodiment of rape and murder, and in appearance much like the Empress's sons. Tamora says that the 2 men are her ministers, and will also assist Titus in finding his revenge. To the delight of Tamora, Titus concludes his enigmatic raving, stating, "We worldly men have mad, mistaking eyes," and comes down to her and her sons. Tamora is confident enough that Titus is unaware of who she and her 2 sons really are, and so waits patiently for Titus to make his way down. Soon, Titus is standing before Tamora, Chiron, and Demetrius and asks them, "What shall we do?" Tamora tests Titus and replies, "What wouldst thou have us do, Andronicus?" Titus replies that they should find someone that looks exactly like who they are and do some horrible thing, because the guilty persons look just like them. Tamora plays along and states that they will indeed be revenged on such persons, but in the meantime she says, "Send for Lucius and arrange a banquet at thy house, where she will bring the emperor, the empress, and her sons, where she will help Titus be revenged on them all." Just as their agreement is about to be sealed, Marcus appears. Titus asks Marcus to bring Lucius to his house. There, at the home of Titus, the men will feast and talk with the emperor and the empress. The dutiful Marcus agrees and exits. Tamora takes her exit, but at Titus's request, leaves behind her 2 sons to keep the old man company. Once Tamora is out of sight, Titus calls forth Publius, Caius, and Valentine, who, at Titus's instruction, binds and gags Demetrius and Chiron. Lavinia appears too, holding a basin. While the rapists are being restrained, Titus cuts the brothers' throats. Lavinia catches their blood in the basin. Then they all go into the house to prepare for the feast. Scene 3. The scene quickly shifts to the action of Marcus finding Lucius. The moment is brief. Lucius agrees to return to Titus's house, and Marcus agrees to guard Aaron and the baby. Saturninus and Tamora appear with an entourage, and, after a few threatening exchanges with Lucius, the emperor is calmed down by Marcus, who insists that their debate be conducted calmly during the feast that Titus has carefully prepared. A table is brought in with perhaps other accoutrement that would befit a dinner. Present at the feast are Saturninus, Tamora, Marcus, Lucius, Titus's grandson, also named Lucius, Titus, and Lavinia with a veil over her face. Before the dinner begins, Titus welcomes all and then speaks a warning for what's about to happen. "Although the cheer be poor, 'twill fill your stomachs." The double meaning is obvious. They are seated for a feast so that their stomachs will be filled with food. The meal itself will be gruesome, so their stomachs will be filled with disgust. The first horrific act includes the reminder of an old story about the centurion Virginius, who slew his daughter to prevent her from being raped by Appius Claudius, but in some versions of the story, he slew her because she had been raped already by Claudius. After Tamora and Saturninus have politely taken a bite of their food, Titus asks Saturninus if Virginius was right to slay his daughter because she had been enforced, stained, and deflowered. Saturninus says that indeed it was right of Virginius to slay his daughter because the girl should not survive her shame, and that even her presence would renew the sorrows of her father. Titus agrees and states that he must perform the same act, and so he does. He removes the veil from Lavinia's face and slits her throat. Saturninus is appalled, and so is most of the audience, at what Titus has just done, and Saturninus wants to know who raped her. Who? Echoes Titus. Why, Chiron and Demetrius. When Saturninus calls for the two guilty brothers to be brought forth, Titus calmly and neatly explains that no one need look further than in the pies that they are eating, for the two brothers are baked within. Before Tamora can respond, Titus stabs her. Saturninus doesn't sit still. He gets up and kills Titus, but before Saturninus can make sense of what has just happened, Lucius stabs Saturninus. With the Goths and the Roman soldiers present, a general uproar ensues. Marcus manages to quiet everyone down and calls forth Lucius to explain what has happened so that everyone will feel satisfied. Lucius does so. Marcus next explains that Aaron, lover of Tamora, is still alive and in Titus's house. Aaron is to testify that what Marcus and Lucius have said is true and then be buried breast deep in the ground until he is dead. The gathered crowd agrees that Lucius should be ruler. Lucius promises to restore Rome to a healthy state and to give proper burials to his kinsmen. As for Tamora, her body is to be thrown to beasts and birds of prey. Here concludes Act 5 of Titus Andronicus for I Hear Shakespeare.